evening. Good evening. Come on, I've been on vacation 7 days. You could have practiced all that. You didn't. My name's Cleve Winter. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement here at the Pratt. Thank you so much for coming out. That was unnerving, but I appreciate it. We will start in about 10 minutes. Laura and Megan will be in conversation with each other for 45 minutes. They'll have time for questions, 15 minutes. Please direct all questions to that mic, and to that mic over there. That way everyone watching our virtual stream will hear questions and ask, oh, you have a virtual stream. Yes, we do. 90% of our programs are live streamed on our Facebook and YouTube page. Can't make it. The weather's really bad. It's just going to get worse, folks. After the program, Laura and Megan will be happy to sign your books that you purchased from Greene Reads. We're outside selling books right now. And appreciate you coming out in this weather. Start in about 10 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Yay! Yay! Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Pleasure. My name is Sophia Nahlawi, author event coordinator here at the Pratt Library, and thank you for joining us this evening. If you have not seen already, our book-selling partner this evening is Greene Reads. They are selling books. They will also be selling books after tonight's program, so if you'd like to buy a book at any time during the program or afterwards, they will be there selling you books. And so now, onwards. This evening, I'm happy to welcome Laura Lippman and Abbott to the Pratt Library to discuss their new books, Murder Takes a Vacation and El Dorado Drive. In Murder Takes a Vacation, the highly acclaimed New York Times bestselling author Laura Lippman returns with an irresistible mystery featuring Muriel Blossom, a former private investigator and middle-aged widow whose vacation on a Parisian river cruise turns into a deadly international mystery that only she can solve. And in Megan Abbott's El Dorado Drive, the New York Times bestselling author of The Turnout offers a simmering, atmospheric novel of friendship and betrayal following a women-led pyramid scheme in suburban Detroit. Right? Megan Abbott turns her keen eye towards women and money. It's a riveting story about power, vulnerability, and how desperation draws out our most destructive impulses. Since Laura Lippman's debut, she has been recognized as a distinctive voice in mystery fiction and named one of the essential crime writers of the last 100 years. Her books have won most of the major awards in her field and have been translated into more than 25 languages. In 2025, Lippman was named a Grand Master by the Mystery Writers of America, a Lifetime Achievement Award whose recipients have included Agatha Christie, Michael Connelly, Graham Greene, P.D. James, Elmore Leonard, and Walter Mosley. Megan Abbott is the Edgar Award-winning author of 11 crime novels, including You Will Know Me, Give Me Your Hand, and the New York Times bestseller The Turnout, the winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. She received her PhD in English and American Literature from New York University, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Paris Review, and The Wall Street Journal. Dare Me, the series she adapted from her own novel, is now streaming on Netflix. Ooh. In the Wall Street Journal's review of Murder Takes a Vacation, they wrote that the book's protagonist has what it takes to confront both gold diggers and killers in a plot that has the charm of a summertime caper. And Publishers Weekly wrote that El Dorado Drive is a nerve-shredding thriller. Abbott probes the minefield of sisterhood to harrowing effect, using staccato prose to amplify the inherent apprehension and anxiety of the siblings' relationships. The result is a tense and twisty delight. It is my great pleasure to welcome Laura Lippman and Megan Abbott.
Good evening. Hi. Oh my God, this is really impressive. So Megan and I decided we would start off by talking about the weirdest things. My book came out 3 weeks ago. Megan's came out 2 weeks ago, and we said, let's talk about what's the weirdest thing that's happened to you since your book came out?
Yeah, well, you're on tour, you're on the road, things get wild and woolly out there, America. But I will say that this springs to mind. It's a personal story, but one of my events was in my hometown, Detroit, Michigan, and the book is set there. And I did have someone I went to high school with show up, sometimes happens, showed up at my event. And he came up afterwards somewhat hesitantly, and I remembered him, and vaguely. It was a long time ago, and I had a big class, and he said, I've thought all these years that you hated me. And I said, hated you? I said, I barely remember you. I didn't say that. But then he recalled some prom night long ago where he took my best friend to prom and sort of disappeared. One of those prom stories where he sort of abandoned her at prom, and I had to tell him that I didn't remember any of it because I had drank a half pint of Jack Daniels that night. True story. Never again. No more Jack Daniels. How about you?
So I was in Newport, Rhode Island, where I'd never been before, and I had to go to the train station early in the morning to go back to the city the night that you and I were in Brooklyn together. And I got this very valuable Lyft driver. He was one of 11 brothers and sisters, had grown up there, and he had a lot of dirt to talk about Judge Judy, which I don't feel like I can repeat fairly because I can't check it. But we were talking about injuries, and I was like, oh, it happened. It was like, oh, it's 3 years ago today that I fell down a flight of steps and I injured my shoulder. And it was like, he said, I injured my shoulder, and the doctor wanted to do surgery, but it was my right arm. And I said, how will I ever wipe my butt? And he had a lot more to say about his butt over this. Like, he talked to me about a medication he was taking and the side effects that involved his butt. I was really surprised by how many ways someone could talk about their butt.
He had a lot of butt content.
Yeah, it was like, there's a lot of butt content.
Wow.
So that's, that's, I guess that's just what they do in Rhode Island. Haven't spent a lot of time there. So, how long have we known each other? Have we ever figured this out yet?
I feel like it was 2006, maybe. My first book came out in 2005.
That sounds right. I think I met you within a year of your first book coming out. And I feel like we've always been like these two different train lines that are running on parallel tracks, but in different ways.
Yes.
Like, why are we, when 2 years ago, when Prom Mom and Beware the Woman, how about Abbott titles, we were obviously both thinking about female bodily autonomy and what does it mean and what happens if it's taken away and what are the consequences. What track are we on now? What are we doing right now?
I feel like we're women of a certain age. And let's put them at the center of our stories. The women that don't get to be the center of the stories, and in my case, so they can do bad things. In your case,
for once, my character's doing good things. But we're also both. I want you to talk about this. I think we're both really interested in women and money.
Yes.
So talk about that in El Dorado Drive, how the money comes in and why it matters.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and you've said, and I think it's true, that crime fiction is really the place that money gets talked about most in fiction for obvious reasons, because often the crime involves money, but it also becomes a way to explore the stuff we don't talk about money. And I think money is still one of those really taboo topics. And I think particularly I was interested in women in middle age. In this case, this is set during the last recession, and their lives have been overturned. They've had relative affluence, and it's all gone for different reasons in their life. And it really brings forward, which I think always moments of economic instability do, our personal, almost always come from childhood, feelings about money. And if money was talked about in your household, if there was a feeling that there wasn't enough of it. And money's, this sounds like a very David Mamet phrase, but money's never just about money. And so I think for the women in the book, it's a way to talk about how it's related to security, independence, revenge, freedom, all these sort of a way to with the women involved in this scheme they become involved with, all of it comes like rushing forward. And I think it's such a weird parallel to your book, because it's sort of all of it's been taken away from them, and from this blossom, suddenly landed in her lap, and it causes just as much of a crisis, I would say.
I mean, apparently the stories, I'll reveal it, I don't think it's a big spoiler. My character finds a lottery ticket. She doesn't play the lottery. She finds an unsigned lottery ticket. If you do play the lottery, sign your ticket. Absolutely sign it the moment you buy it, because there's just no way to prove ownership otherwise. And I do think that these stories about the lottery ruining people's lives apparently are somewhat exaggerated. And if you do a deep dive on that, you won't find that's true. But wait, what the song is, money changes everything. And it really does. And whether it's gaining money or losing money, any sort of seismic shift, this is where we're in concert.
Yes.
Any seismic shift in your status, it's just going to reverberate throughout your life. It's not just, oh, I have less money than I did, I had more money than I did. It's like you now might be a different person, which we're always saying. We're always saying, well, you know, money doesn't define anyone, money doesn't matter. That's such a big lie. Like that, the idea that money doesn't define who you are as a person, and maybe your bank account isn't what creates you, but how you feel about it. And as far as I know, and everyone, like, I'm like really curious. I have huge shame issues around money that are clearly from my family of origin. Like, how in your family did money function? Were you allowed to talk about it, or was it like almost like dirty?
Yeah, I mean, it's a true WASP household, so we never talked about anything, much less money. So it was never discussed. It was never discussed. But I was very aware of it because, you know, where I grew up was very affluent. We were not affluent at all. And so I was surrounded, and this is the 80s, so the era of polo shirts, and, you know, it was all about what jeans did you have. And I mean, not that this has changed. I mean, now brand is far bigger than ever, but it was really the go-go 80s, and I never had the right shirt, or I never had the right sweater, and so I was very aware. I had another version of shame, which is like, but it wasn't that I wanted my parents to buy me those things. I actually felt bad that I wanted them to buy me these things, because I knew they couldn't buy me those things. And so you sort of, it became a big part of the book, thinking about that, about what it meant to sort of, you're essentially excising yourself from the social currency of your high school, et cetera, your town, because you can't participate.
I mean, I think that's something else that we've both been writing about for years, which is the function of desire within a woman's life, and whether you feel guilty about the things that you want, whether you feel entitled to the things that you want. But there's something that's particularly interesting about El Dorado Drive, which is this is the first book you've written set in a specific identifiable place. Well, you've done Hollywood in your historic novels.
Yeah.
But in the novels that you've been doing over the past 10 years, this is the first time that it's an identifiable place, and it's where you grew up.
Yeah.
Walk us through your decision to write something that close to home, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I've often regretted it because it just does open up sort of boxes. Sort of, I always think of your past as the box you put in the back of your closet, the top of the closet, like a hat box. This is something I talk about with my therapist every week. I don't want to pull the box out of the closet, but I never really want to. I always want to imagine someplace else, and I always want the reader to fill in a place they know. But this one, because I guess I wanted to write about women and money, particularly women getting involved in pyramid schemes and MLMs, et cetera. And it seemed like the perfect place because it was so ripe for first of all, Michigan is the capital of MLMs. Amway started in Michigan, and I think Utah has taken over now, but it's some Mormon connection. But certainly growing up in Detroit, I grew up in the era where the auto industry was collapsing, and Detroit had emptied out. Now it's doing much better, but it was a sense that the empire had ended, that was the feeling in Detroit, and that the grand days were over. So it was really a sense of barely hanging on, and so it seemed sort of perfect for this somehow, and sort of a way to bring it to bear. I guess in sort of similar ways, putting your character in extravagant travel and having to sort of negotiate, because I also want to talk, it's sort of adjacent to the money issue, but money and the body, money and clothes and the body and how they all interact. Because I always think of your books, there's something so delicious about the way you use objects, whether they're clothes or food or jewelry, to help define character and desire. And I think it's on full display here.
I mean, it was fun to write a fantasy of sorts, like, oh, you found a lottery ticket in a parking lot and you're suddenly a much richer person. I mean, I've probably talked about this, and it's a hard topic to bring up in my hometown, but my divorce settlement was kind of a lottery. That's not a fun one, but and actually the settlement you get in divorce was actually always your money.
Yes, it's a good point.
But it was like, oh, I have to think about myself differently. Yeah. I had been married for a long time to someone who made so much more money that I was allowed to be kind of just on my own little wavelength, not thinking about it, because I was such a inconsequential contributor to my household that I was just like this happy little tugboat floating behind the ocean liner. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, no, I'm in charge now, and I have to think about these things that I didn't really want to. I have to admit, I was like, no, I kind of like that old system where I just didn't have to think about money, and when I got a royalty check, I was like, ooh, shoes. And of course, I have to say, I mean, I think we both write from really cinematic impulses. So, if you've got a character and she's got money and she's in Paris, she's gonna buy some new clothes. It's almost like a montage.
I think of it like Funny Face. There's anything where there's a makeover or.
I mean, my daughter and I have watched The Devil Wears Prada conservatively, like literally 12 times. And that montage scene just lives in our heads. So, I mean, I would like you to talk a little bit, because it's so fascinating. Do you feel comfortable talking about, there was a real life inspiration?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit, because I had never heard of this case, and I like to think I'm pretty up on true crime stuff.
Yeah, I think probably if it hadn't, so there was a docuseries on HBO, and if it hadn't been during the early pandemic, where I think a lot of people missed it, but it was a story happened in 2010 in Connecticut of a once affluent woman in the midst of, or after a very bad divorce, had lost all her money and was murdered. Then it emerged that she had been involved in this thing called the gifting tables. It was called Murder at Middle Beach, if anyone's seen it. And the gifting tables were basically a pyramid scheme, but all these suburban ladies who lunch were all involved in it. And two of them ended up getting indicted and going to prison for basically the same charges that mobsters go to prison for. With
Mail
wire
fraud, right? Was mail fraud part of it?
Mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, of course, or lying to the IRS, because they had this. I mean, which is how a lot of these pyramid schemes operate. If you give a gift, if it's under a certain threshold, you don't have to declare it on your income taxes. Now, if many people give you under that amount, it's much larger than the threshold. But you could see they were sort of saying that, well, I got $5,000 from this woman, $5,000 from this one, $5,000 different. Totals like $50,000, but they weren't declaring it because each gift was under the threshold. So it was elaborate and probably never would have been caught had this murder hadn't happened. And it was so widespread, they don't feel like they ever even got to the bottom how many women were involved in the state of Connecticut. But it's happened everywhere. If you start to look these things up, there's different names for it, but it fascinated me.
I mean, my memory is that it was almost literally like Fight Club, which was like the first rule of gifting table is you don't say this and you don't say this and you
Yes.
never say this. And
Completely. There's like a whole language you had to use. You're not investing, you don't use words, any financial words. It's all about female empowerment too. There's a lot about using the language of feminism. And then it would be these elaborate things about what to do with all the cash, because you shouldn't deposit more than $10,000 cash in a bank because your bank will have to report it. I learned so much about how to run a pyramid scheme. I mean, I cannot tell you. I mean, there's so many things that they did wrong. But first of all, it was putting everything in writing, because in the indictment, you can read all their rules of how,
I mean, so you've already sold this to A24?
A24, yes.
And is it going to be a film
It'll
or
be
a
an ongoing series, because I
ongoing
feel there's a lot
series.
of life in this pyramid scheme.
and I know, but please tell the audience your pitch.
Oh yeah, I did say this is Goodfellas in a country club, so that.
Yeah, because that's really, I mean, that really is how it works.
Yeah. But speaking of Goodfellas, we have talked, I know, a lot about the cinematic influence, and you had mentioned we both are very inspired by cinema, and I see more than a little cinema in this, maybe more than any of your other books.
I mean, I think it's really hard for me looking back to decide what was the first impulse.
Yeah.
But definitely one of the first two or three would have been Charade, but what if you flip the genders of the leads? How many people have seen Charade? Thank
good.
goodness. I mean, everyone should see it. It's a Stanley Donen film from the 60s. And the reason I saw it was they showed it to us at Rockland Junior High as part of our French lesson. I think, or it was either at Rockland or maybe it was at Wild Lake out in Howard County. But anyway, I saw it in school, and it supposedly had something to do with French, although, I mean, Audrey Hepburn is a translator, but, and the things that, first of all, Cary Grant is the male lead, Audrey Hepburn is the female lead, and there's a significant age difference that Cary Grant is constantly acknowledging, which seemed so charming. The idea that someone thought like a 20-year age difference should be commented on is like, oh, this is really inappropriate. But I was also very interested in the idea of a woman being told that she has something of value when she's so clear. She's like, where is it? Her husband has been murdered. He was you find out pretty soon, I don't feel like this is a spoiler, that he was part of a group of men during World War II who stole gold from the Germans. And it's been converted into something, but what? And where is it? And these very menacing men it's just terrific ensemble cast. So that was a big part of it. We already talked about, I wanted to do a fashion montage. And, I just wanted to do straight up Agatha Christie, Murder on the Nile.
Completely. Well, you have that feeling. I mean, one of the things, and I feel like this is even across a lot of genres, this thing where there's a woman at the center, there's like 2 to 3 men that she comes across and is in constant contact with, and any of them seem like they could be dangerous. Any of them seem like they could be a love interest, and you can't tell who is who. And you handle that so well. They sort of, she's not someone, maybe you should talk a little bit about Mrs. Blossom. She's not someone, I think, who goes on this for romantic purposes. Exactly. Maybe her own kind of romance of travel, but she does, there are a lot of men that cross her path.
Yeah, Mrs. Blossom at 68 is an incredibly sexy woman. She just is. And I've thought a lot about that because I just think it's because she ultimately, the world may not love what she looks like, but she's comfortable in her own skin. And I think that's what people see, and I think that's why people are drawn to her. And yeah, I'm a woman in my 60s, and I've talked about this a lot over the past couple of weeks, which is there are 2 things going on. One is it's very meta. This is literally a story about someone who used to be a secondary character in the Tess Monahan series. She is literally told in the pages of the book, you should be trying to be the main character in your own life. And so there's that thing going on. And then the other thing going on that I've thought a lot about we've spent so much time working in narrative and 3-act structure, and there's rising action, climax, falling action. And when you're working in narrative, the final third of your work is a narrowing of possibility. You're eliminating what can happen. That person can't be the murderer because they just turned up dead, for example. Or, obviously this is no longer, these things are being eliminated. And that's how a work of narrative works. I don't think that's how life works. And I think there's a possibility in someone wanted to argue with me when I was on the road. The second weirdest thing that happened, I said I was in the final third of my life. And they're like, no, it's not the final. I'm like, I'm gonna die. I'm pretty comfortable with that information that, and they had this incredible rhetorical device for pretending that there was no death and you weren't in your final. But I do think that what's interesting about life as opposed to fiction is there is a possibility that your life can continue to broaden depending, you have to catch some lucky breaks in terms of your health and your finances, but in life, the possibilities don't narrow. I mean, that's essentially the last image in the book is the idea that things are getting bigger, things are getting more beautiful. Blossoming, if you will. I mean, I think both of us often have an image. I have a guess, but I'm curious in writing your book, was there a singular image that was just kind of burned into your brain and this is sort of the thing?
Yes, yeah. I think you probably know what I'm going to say, which is this, I don't know if any of you have been to a high school or college graduation party recently where they had these things called the money cake. Do any of you know this? So I did a deep dive on money cakes. I didn't even know about it, or maybe you've seen variations on it. The money bouquet, the money, I'm getting some nods. My sister-in-law a few weeks ago at my nephew's graduation had money, Hawaiian leis. They were all, so they're things made of money. And the money cake is really the pièce de la résistance, excuse my terrible French. But it's essentially an elaborate cake made of money. The bills, you make it with styrofoam. It's not an actual cake. And the bills sort of surround every square inch of it. It's elaborate. There are kits you can buy on Etsy. There's guides to this on Pinterest. If you Google money cake, you will see it. Some of them even involve money coming out of the middle of the cake that you pull out on a string. And there's, it's made for Instagram, right? And this was fascinating to me because it's not really what I associate. I know you give money to, your child, someone's child who graduates, you give them money. But it feels like it has this weird suggestion that wealth is now coming to you. And I feel like something deeply ironic about that you're crowning achievement, and then this is like a cake made of money that you probably will never make. This sort of sense of downward mobility, which in a large sense is what the book is about. What if your child doesn't always do better than you? What if the economy isn't what it was? We still in the culture have this sense of boom era that is long past. There's something kind of haunted about it, and it was sort of the beginning for me of lots of scenes with money.
Yeah, that whole idea that we can't quite let go of this myth.
Yeah.
That I think we're letting go of the myth that everything's getting better.
Yeah.
I think we're pretty over that.
It's been pummeled out of us, I think.
Did you hear that people on the right are upset about Superman? Have you heard about this?
No.
Yeah, they're upset because the director James Gunn pointed out in the new Superman, which, by the way, the actor, he was in both We Own This City and Lady in the Lake, the new Superman, and he's also in Pearl, which I was
going to say, and
he's
Pearl,
in Pearl, which is a
yes,
fantastic
yes.
performance. Apparently, he said he was for truth, justice, and all that other stuff, and he wouldn't say the American way. But what James Gunn, the director, said was Superman is an immigrant. Ooh.
Amazing. Amazing. I never thought I'd have warm feelings towards James Gunn.
I know. And that he promotes kindness.
Yeah.
And apparently the right-wing media has just gone nuts.
Kindness.
An immigrant who promotes kindness, and they're like, like doing these mock-ups of Superman with like a, a hammer on his.
Oh, hammer and
I don't
sickle.
know. But so I can't. Okay, so I'm so addled. Were we supposed to talk for 30 minutes or talk for 45 minutes?
I think 40, but I want
Okay.
to ask you about your image that you had in mind for the book.
I think the image was always the missing statue. So, this is a book that centers on a missing statue of a bird, and one of my big influences was from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler. So for those of you who haven't read it, it's a children's book. Go ahead and read it. It's one of the most perfect novels ever written, and it's about a brother and sister who have run away and are hiding in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they become obsessed with the statue of an angel and trying to figure out whether Michelangelo really carved it. So I think that was a big part of it. And, really the work of Joan Mitchell, the abstract expressionist painter, of whom I was utterly, this is something Mrs. Blossom and I absolutely share. I had not heard of Joan Mitchell until there was a Baltimore Museum of Art show. I believe that was in 2022, and it was gorgeous. And I was so embarrassed because I thought I was pretty up to date on the female abstract expressionist, and her canvases are just so expansive and bold and colorful. And Joan Mitchell was, I think, physically a tiny person, but as an artist, she was not scared to take up space. And she was someone who really early in her career said, I'm just going to do abstracts from now on. And she was just so confident in everything. And those canvases kind of lived in the back of my mind the whole time I was writing this.
Yeah.
So I guess before we turn it over to questions, because we're in Baltimore, should we talk about tests?
I was going to just bring that up. Yes. Some exciting developments on the test front. Would you like to share?
So I'll probably talk a little bit more than I plan to, but the way things work is you write something, someone options it, it doesn't get made, it comes back to you. And with the test books, which were my first books, that happened twice, that they were optioned and then the option returned to me. I have never wanted to work on any adaptation of my work, but at this point I was like, Tess is too personal, and I won't sell her unless I'm attached to it. But I said to my agents, I know I don't know how to make television, so we need to match make me to a showrunner, someone who knows how to make television. And they had this long list, and I was looking through it, and they took me out to lunch last summer, and they were like, well, what about Megan Abbott? I was like, well, if she wants to do it, of course. I was like, I think I should ask her though, because I need her to be honest with me if she doesn't want to work on it. So Megan and I have been united.
Yes.
The work, every Tess novel and every Tess short story has been optioned, but we now have to go out on pitches. There's a lot of road ahead of us. But we have been spending a lot of time talking about how to bring Tess
up to date.
up
right.
to
yeah.
date.
Yeah.
How to, and people are like, and will you film in Baltimore? I'm like, that is so far away from being a decision. That's so far down the road. But yeah, Megan and I are going to be working on adapting Tess for television.
Exciting. If someone had told me when we met that one day, 19 years later, that I would get to work on this with
19 years
you.
later.
Oh
my God.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm really excited because we have chosen the book that we would start the series with, but there is so much there. So, and I feel like we need a Tess on TV now for sure.
What's our pitch is kind of like Tess Monahan, the normie detective.
Yes,
She
doesn't have special skills.
She can't tell when people are lying. She's not super quirky. I will say it's funny because I'm old, and in the meetings that we've had with the people who have optioned it, I keep making this joke, except no one can come up with anything better, which is like, my pitch is always like, what if Jim Rockford had a granddaughter and she lived in Baltimore? And everyone's like, nobody knows who Jim Rockford is. But I'm always like, yeah, but that's the pitch, right? It's like whatever, and then, like once you hear it, you like can't really improve upon it.
I also feel like it's Hollywood, and no one will admit that they don't know who Jim Rockford
So they're just like,
is.
nah,
So I'm just like,
just
that
like,
sounds great. That
sure,
sounds great.
what if Jim Rockford
It's always
had a
what they say
granddaughter?
about Hollywood people. They'll kill you with enthusiasm. I think we go with it. That's what I say.
So that's
Yeah,
we've got
it's
some work ahead of us.
exciting. We do,
Oh,
but I'm
man.
excited.
What
I
are you
feel
working
like
on
it's
next book-wise,
time.
though? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm in
Because
the
you-
very early days. Yeah, I'm at that stage where is this the book? I think it's the book. But it's about it's also based. I can only base things on true stories, but it's about I think you know the backstory of this, but it's about a town that people believe is cursed. A series of bad things
Oh,
happen
yeah.
in one town, and it's sort of interested in the idea of how if you feel you're cursed, you sort of perpetuate the curse. You know, it sort of hangs over you. And it sounds dark, but it's a weirdly, so far, rather ecstatic. It's a book to write. I don't know. Because it's all set around these, I'm going back to teenage girls
Yay.
who are determined to overthrow the curse.
You should go see John Proctor's The Villain. Have you seen that
I
yet?
haven't yet. I'm excited
Oh,
to see
definitely
it.
see that. Oh, so much fun. That sounds great.
How about you? I know you've been working on a couple things.
I'm
but-
having a discussion tomorrow about whether I will be doing another Mrs. Blossom book right away.
You have to. You
I think I
have
do,
to.
and I'm pretty ready to go. But we're gonna sit. My agent and my editor. We're gonna sit down tomorrow in a Zoom meeting and talk about. I think that's what they want. It's
Of course
interesting.
it is. Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's some deadline issues about how fast I can turn it around because I've been working on something else for 6 to 8 months. But I have a feeling I should probably hang out with Mrs. Blossom some more.
Yeah. It's
And now we're
time.
ready
Yeah,
for your questions.
questions.
What happens is
They're going to bring. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so
It's from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg. It was probably a finalist for the Newbery, but did not win it. Other books of hers did win the Newbery Medal.
if
welcome.
you have a question and you would like to ask your question, you're going to come to the microphone I am standing at, or the microphone on the other side of the auditorium where my associate Cleve is standing. I also have a question from our online audience to kick us off for both of you, which is, what are your writing processes like? And have there been changes to those processes over the years as you write more and more?
Boy. Well, it's always embarrassing to answer this because it's so chaotic a process. But you know, I think with it, like we write every day. You know, you have to write every day. It's so tedious. It's like having homework every day for the rest of your life. But you also don't feel good if you haven't done it. So I write every day. There's a great quote from Walter Mosley about this, is you have to touch the book every day. And that means can mean a variety of things. It can mean producing pages. It can mean rereading what you've already written. It can mean taking a long walk where you're solving a plot problem. But you have to stay in the book. So I do try to do that. Has it changed over the years? Yeah, I'm a little more orderly about it. You know, you don't know how, when you start, I don't know how you feel. I didn't know how to plot a book. It was completely random, and I had to do so much in revision. Now I feel like I have a much stronger first draft.
I think, one of the things I want, I try to write every day when I'm writing. I try to write a minimum of 1,000 words. I try to keep going forward in the early drafts and not spend too much time on revision until I have something whole. Something I've been thinking about so much, because there's so much talk about AI, is this is the point. Like the struggle and the writing and the fighting with the book and the doing of it, and the idea that you might be able to like feed something into a prompt and it would produce a book. I don't even understand why that's attractive to people, because the writing is the point. And even when it's like, I mentioned I've been working on a book, it hasn't been going well. I've struggled with it, I'm fighting with it, but I'm happy to fight with it because that's how you do it. And I don't know another way to do it. I wouldn't understand someone who just wants, I mean, this is actually something you come up a lot. People are like, I have a great idea, I'll tell you the idea, you write it down and we'll split everything 50-50. You know, like, I'm like ChatGPT. I've been, and it's like, I don't even get that. It's like the idea is, it's hard for people to always understand this. Ideas are easy. Ideas, I'm never gonna want for ideas. It's like, but taking that idea and turning it into a book like manuscript, that's what we spend 1 to 2 years doing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So.
Yeah, it's the messiness of it that is what matters. It's what makes it feel human, and I think it's what I love reading a book is that you feel it all on the page. It's not smooth brain, I guess is the phrase they now have for it. I don't want any smooth brain books.
Hi, I have a question about the cover art of your books. So Megan, your book I feel like is very in the genre of like murder mystery, like it goes along with a lot of other like, you know, hardcovers that you see. And Laura, I feel like your book is very kind of in the trend of like how all rom-coms tend to look together, and like it's very trendy with the font style and the art style of the boat and the river. So I wanted to know, how do you guys come in your process of writing? How do you guys decide, you know, what your cover art looks like? Because judge a book by a cover. Does like a team vision board it for you?
They'll
or
show it to us, and you have to understand the cover is ultimately a marketing decision. In my case, that is pretty much the first cover I saw, and I thought they knocked it out of the park. Because for me, one of the big challenges was they had to let people know that this was going to be a different kind of Laura Lippman book. And so, I mean, the thing I love most is the little splash. You know, like there's a body going over and, you know, it says a novel on the bow. So I just thought they did a great job. For your cover, what was the conversation?
Yeah, you know, they really do control it. I mean, if you're very unhappy with it, they don't want you to be unhappy, but you don't really control it. But in this case, and they hadn't even shown me anything. They had shown my agent something, and my agent was like, no, and I never even saw it. And then and then my agent said, well, I do collect a lot of photos when I'm writing a book to help me get in the feeling of it. And one of my favorite photographers, this is not one of his, but it's Gregory Crewston, who does these spooky suburbs at night, sort of Lynchian, and so I had sent some of those, and then they ended up finding one similar, not stealing, but an actual photographer that they licensed, but they turned it on its side. So I wanted something that was suburban, but you know, I write a lot about the what goes on behind closed doors in the suburbs, so that seemed to evoke that. And then they added all the elements, but it is, you know, there's been covers of mine I love, and there's ones I haven't really liked, you know, but ultimately there is so much about what else is out there now, you know, always there's, you know, marketing, Salesforce has opinions. Sometimes the head of Barnes & Noble has an opinion about it. And so it is sort of something that, you know, it's a minimal amount. You have to sort of, at a certain point, relent to the forces of the market, I think.
Right, you can't take it too personally, and the fact of the matter is, people in bookstores really do judge books by their covers. It's just absolutely, I mean, even serious readers, people who think, you know, they come in, they have their own list, I want this, I want this, I want this. Your cover may be the thing that gets someone to like cross the store and pick your book up, and that might make the sale.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation. My question is really for Megan. You said you write about true stories. If you were writing a book about someone who actually lived but has been deceased for quite a while, how much license can you take with the actual story?
Yeah, it's a great question. It always starts with something real, and then I change it basically everything, so like my book isn't set in Connecticut. None of the characters are the same. There are two sisters in the real life case, but there are three sisters in this, and none of the sisters are the same. So I move it so far. It's just there's something about the smack of the reel that gets me started. But to your point, there is one of my books, my second book, which is called The Song Is You. Well, there's two. Two of my books I did based on real people who are dead. So I have done it. I have another one, Bury Me Deep. Those are both based on very famous true crimes from the 30s and 40s. One is a missing starlet, and one is a woman known as the trunk murderess. So that should tell you a lot about her disposal of bodies. They were, everyone was long dead in those cases, but I invented most of the characters around them. But it is delicate. I mean, you do feel like when Bury Me Deep about the trunk murderess came out, I went to an event in Scottsdale, Arizona. It is a very famous crime in Phoenix. So there was one of the characters, one of the real life figures, grandchildren came and actually was delighted about it. But it felt uncomfortable, I must say, because she understood that it was fiction, but it is delicate. So since then, I've moved away from doing that, even though I loved doing that, because it did feel a little like I didn't have a right to do so somehow. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question from the online audience, or the audience watching online, the real people. Can you discuss a protagonist from one of your books that you most identified with?
I think that's harder for Megan. For me, it's obviously Tess Monahan, who I thought of as like my younger, wittier sister with poor impulse control, which makes her better as a character in a novel.
How do you decide then to have her do something you wouldn't do? Like, how does that work?
She's rash. She doesn't think, she's braver but dumber than I am. So she'll do things in the heat of the moment. Like one of the things, we talk about mot d'escalier, which is the idea that you think of the perfect thing to say later when you're on the staircase. And I always would joke that Tess thinks of the perfect thing to say and actually says it in the moment, which is often not a good idea. So that's where we deviate.
Well, because you also, writing it, you can think ahead. You can think all of it through. Plus, your characters have to make bad choices. If it's a crime novel, they have to get into a mess in some ways, right?
Yeah, which is why making Tess a mom was such a bad idea, because as a mom, her license to make bad choices is seen in a very different light. And when people ask me, are you going to write about Tess again? I would love to, but I have to come up with the book-length vehicle where people aren't going to be appalled by her behavior.
Yeah.
I wrote myself into that corner.
Yeah. It's the series question too. Like, how do you advance their life without, and also the rashness of youth. As someone who writes a lot about young people do make quick, the prefrontal cortex.
25. So have you come up with yours yet?
No. I mean, the truth is they're all me, You can't write them if they're not part of you.
Yeah, that's true.
We're
We're
often,
all of them.
Yeah, and often they're the parts of yourself that you don't like. In my case, I mean, they're like I would say probably the closest is I have some very driven perfectionist to a fault. Women in my books, it's definitely a version of me, parts of me that I don't like, that are just single-minded and judgmental and yeah, intense. So, and then there are ones who just behave badly all the time, and they just get to do the things I don't do. So, it's like when you always say in your dream, all the people in your dream are you. It's such a narcissistic thing, but writers are nothing if not narcissists. But you couldn't really write them if they weren't some aspect of yourself.
Yeah, I think to some extent because you're doing this like magic trick that involves empathy. So even if you've come up with this character who's so very different from you, you then have to spend all this time being like, okay, but so who is this character? What would they do? How would they act?
Yeah.
Can I understand them? Can I get to the point where their actions make sense to me? And that's pretty much like 90% of writing a novel.
Yeah, I wanted to ask too, because you too have written about inspired by real life cases. So you actually, your answer to that would be interesting too, how you decide to negotiate, including some local cases.
A lot of local cases. I've moved away from that somewhat in the past few years, but it's a really tricky question, and my thinking about it keeps evolving. And I think one thing that's really hard for, like, even novelists have trouble with this idea that people use their imagination and make stuff up. And so you start with this nugget from a true life case. I mean, the first thing I do is I research nothing, because I don't want to know the real story. If I'm inspired by something that's happened, it's usually because it touches on a thematic concern. But it's really tricky, because if it's recognizable, if someone can say, I know who that person was, and especially if they have a connection to the person, people do feel as if something has been taken from them. And, this is a world in which, well, I'm in the middle of reading our friend Sarah Wyman's amazing book that's coming out this fall about the first trial that involved marital rape, the Rideout case in the late 70s. I believe I have the years right. And immediately someone like Greta Rideout was being offered money. I'd completely forgotten that there was a TV movie that starred Mickey Rourke and Linda Hamilton. But, so people are right to believe that their life stories might have value, depending. So it's really tricky. And I don't want to be glib and pretend that I have an answer to it. I believe that I'm an ethical person. I believe I'm a serious and considered person. But when we are inspired by, and again, it's really important. I've always used the terminology inspired by. I've never ripped anything from a headline. As a former journalist, I have no desire to play that kind of Law and Order romantic game. But it's tough. It's really tough, because inevitably people are going to have feelings about it, and their feelings are legitimate.
Yeah.
Please help me thank tonight's authors, Laura Lippman, and Megan Abbott. And so now we're going to get some books signed. We will be outside in around 5 minutes. We're going to line up outside. I will be outside to do some post-its with people's names on it. And if you haven't bought books already, books are still for sale by Grace Reads. We'll see you outside shortly. And thank you for coming tonight.
Love and happiness. Oh.